Good evening, all, and welcome to the August 15th regular meeting of the Morro Bay Planning Commission. Let the record reflect that all members are present with the exception of Commissioner Luer. We do have a quorum, and the meeting is called to order. And we will begin with a moment of silence, please. Very well, and if you will stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. This is a brief period set aside for Planning Commissioner announcements. Are there any announcements from the Planning Commission this evening? Michael.
Just to save the date, I understand there's going to be a community celebration of Cerrito Peak on September 16th. I believe it's in the afternoon, I think 2 to 5, and details are still emerging, but that's one to celebrate our city asset.
Bring your hiking boots.
Earlier this week, or late last week, I went to the Ocean Protection Council meeting in Sacramento, and it was I love those meetings. You learn a lot. And one of the things that came out is that the Secretary Laird, the Secretary of Natural Resources, and the EPA Secretary Rodriguez, who both sit on that council, have joined into the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification. And if you're interested, you could get on oaalliance.org for more information on that.
Thank you very much, Richard. Okay, seeing no more announcements then, we will proceed on to our initial public comment period. This is open to all members of the public. If there's anything that you would like to address the commission on, please come forward, give us your name, and we'd love to hear from you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Teft, commissioners and city staff. Talking about the ESHA. I'm Carol Truesdale, a resident of City from 1995 and a homeowner living in North Morro Bay. Thank you, Chairman Tepp, for addressing violations by the current applicant at 3300 Panorama property to the ESHA area located. And during the August 1st, 2017 Planning Commission meeting, I was not able to attend due to my responsibilities with the Neighborhood Watch Program and the Morro Bay Police Department National Night Out. However, I did review the reply. The GPAC meeting is coming up on Thursday, August 17th. It's very important because one of the areas that are being discussed is the ESHA areas within our city and how to protect and preserve them in their natural state. I've mentioned this in previous statements. We do not own this land. We are stewards, and it's our responsibility while living here in Morro Bay to protect and hold accountable those builders and construction companies that do not consider the ESHA area ordinance as important. Second, the North Morro Bay corridor, specifically the main street, whereby the old Texaco site of 9.6 acres is a proposed zone for high density. This will have a grave impact on the residents, streets, and traffic of North Morro Bay and destroy a beautiful area that could be used for medium density build out, whereby some of the green area could be utilized as a park for the potential development. I'll leave the wisdom to you gentle giants of industry to make the heartfelt and correct decisions for the city's future. For all, you are stewards like myself. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much.
My name is Betty Winholtz. I want to label what is going on in Morro Bay, which I consider a crisis, and that's our housing crisis. I think we all know about it. It's hard to find places to live. More people are turning their long-term rentals into vacation rentals, or people are inheriting property and then selling it, and then that becomes a second home for someone else. So I would like to say we have a crisis in Morro Bay when it comes to housing. And I think that this is something that needs to come to the Planning Commission, actually more than to the GPAC. I think it's something that you have more wisdom about because you all have been on the Planning Commission longer. You've dealt with a number of projects. You know what is going on in Morro Bay in terms of our housing. And I think that it's all connected to hotels, to B&Bs, to vacation rentals, to secondary homes, and there's a solution in there somewhere. And so I'm hoping that you all will take the bull by the horns and discuss it, come up with some workshops so you can get input from the public. But when, in the last week, what spurred me to come tonight is someone in my neighborhood owns about 10 properties in town, rentals, and he got 70 applications for one rental. That's a lot, okay? And it wasn't just people coming in from outside. These are people who live in Morro Bay or Los Osos and are looking for something because they're being kicked out of where they live because their place just got sold or for some reason. And the other incident that happened this last week is I have a friend who has a relative that actually got a rental because it never got on the market. It was word of mouth, and before a sign could go up, so-and-so talked to so-and-so, and the rental that was empty is now filled, which is a good thing, but I'm saying we have a crisis. And I think that it's the government's job to deal with that, and I think we can deal with that short of rent control and short of eliminating vacation rentals. I think there's a solution in there, and I would love to be part of that, but I don't need to be part of that. But this is a situation that affects the economics of our town, because if we don't have people here that can do our jobs, then we don't have an economy. And we may depend on tourists, but we need to have year-round people, and we need to do that now before it gets really wicked like in other places. And so I'm hoping that at some point soon you all will agendize this topic and address it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak this evening? Seeing none, then, we will close public comment, bring it back to the commission. Any comments or responses?
I do have a comment regarding vacation rentals. When I worked in Cayucas, the percentages there were quite high. There was like 30-40% vacation rentals, and at the time, I was doing a sewer flow study in that whole area. And people need to know that vacation rentals, they tend to surcharge our infrastructure. You know, it's not just the treatment; it's getting the wastewater there. So this is a not only a issue of housing, but an issue of public health.
Yeah, on that subject of affordable housing, I have the direct experience of having gone through a home remodel so that we needed an alternative place to live for 6 months, and there was no place in Morro Bay. We cast a pretty wide net, including San Luis Obispo and further south. I can recall in San Luis Obispo there was a rental property, and we went on a Saturday, and there must have been a dozen people in line before us. By the time we got to the front of the line, there were another 10 behind us. They were expecting the same number the next day. So I would imagine there were probably at least 30 or 40 applicants. We eventually had to find a place in Paso Robles. So I am in sympathy with the situation. I think we should do something about it.
Yes, so one thing I'd say is when we did our housing element, my recollection is we talked about trying to emphasize workforce housing and things like that. Do we have any mechanisms identified at the current time. Maybe this goes into some of the things that are in the general plan about monitoring how those goals are being achieved. I mean, this sounds like, from what Ms. Winholtz is saying and what some of the personal experiences of some of us are, is that we're actually losing ground on some of this, on some of these aspects.
I mean, housing is a huge issue countywide, statewide, and there's not a lot of easy solutions to it. I mean, I think it comes up regularly in the commentary associated with the general plan update. We regularly talk about housing. Nice thing that we do have some housing developments that are coming forward right now. So we're going to build some housing. They're in plan check right now. So that's kind of nice, and there will be all ranges of housing, which is good. Although most of it's not rental; it's for purchase. But it's not all like high-end homes. It's some condo things and some lower-end condo type stuff. So we do have some stuff that's coming online. As far as where we're at in the implementation of the housing element, that might be something that's worthwhile to take a look at. From the Planning Commission standpoint, to see where we're at with that. Again, it's not something that's currently on the work program to take a look at, and we have a whole lot of other initiatives going on right now. But given that we are in the middle of the general plan update, it might not be a bad idea to just take a look to see what the policies are that are in there. So scheduling that for a meeting might not be a bad idea. We will, when we're done with the general plan and LCP update, be moving to the housing element. It's a separate element of the general plan, but it's on a schedule, and so we'll be starting the update process for that after we finish the current general plan and LCP update. But wouldn't be a bad idea to take a look at it. I know our consultants looked at it for consistency purposes, throughout the general plan and LCP document that we're preparing, to make sure that it's clear. We'll also be, developing a vacation rental ordinance. Right now we have a moratorium on vacation rentals. We have a cap at 250. So that's the number that we have in place currently of those. And we have a waiting list probably of 30 or 40 for that. And to various degrees, our finance department does monitor and look and search out other ones that maybe aren't permitted, and so we do some of that. But we have a problem in Morro Bay has a not completely unique issue in that we have a lot of secondary homes here. About 20% of our housing stock are second homes. So you have it's an underhoused situation there.
So from a process point of view, this is a little bit complex to me, complex. Because we have the GPAC, which is working on right now primarily the land use element, which strongly impacts housing availability. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have the council, which is working on the vacation rental ordinance, I guess. So maybe the question is, where along the road would the Planning Commission best fit in to the process?
Well, I think you and I think Ms. Winholtz is correct. I mean, you're sort of the land use experts for the city, and you regularly provide recommendations as it relates to that purview. You'll be reviewing all of the documentation related to the general plan and all of the documentation associated with the zoning code update that we're in the process of right now. So, I think to some extent it may give you some perspective, as it relates to housing and what our current policies, sit where they sit now and what we've done to this point. Our secondary unit ordinance, we also have to update that because we're inconsistent with state law, because once we updated it and sent it out, then the state changed the law on us. So we're playing a little catch up with some of those things for secondary units. We do get quite a few of those applications in, which is good. it provides another means of housing, and a lot of those folks are renting those out to individuals as opposed to having family members live in them. So,
yeah. I will say the GPAC is working on some concepts which I think are fairly innovative in terms of encouraging development of moderate and lower income housing that you haven't seen before. So, those should be coming forward. But I think our two speakers tonight sort of demonstrate the two different sides of the issue. We have Ms. Winholtz, who is advocating for an increased amount of moderate and low-income housing available, and that sort of inevitably means higher density. So we have another citizen who's advocating for or opposing higher density on one of our parcels. So it's not clean cut, and there's unlikely to be unanimity among the community.
I think that's always the case, especially when you're talking higher density housing. But it does create issues. We have the property in question was is designated high density residential. It's probably unlikely that we'd be able to change it. We'd experience significant penalties on the housing element side of things if we did, because there's a good chunk of our housing that's allocated towards that lot. So dispersing that other places is probably not going to be easy. So it's not an easy or simple task. Like you said, it's complicated. So anyway,
Scott, let me just say also, we can't just look at it on an isolated petri dish. We need to integrate the public works as well. Like I said, we have densities and high density areas where there's basically there's so many vacation rentals, it changes the zoning by usage almost, you know what I mean? Because of the amount of vacation rentals. And it exacerbates the problem with the collection system. And like in North Morro Bay, we already know that line is already over capacity. So because I know that because I did the study on it. And so when we look at the housing element, we need to integrate not only the zoning and the land use, but also the supporting infrastructure.
it's all part of it for sure. So absolutely, I agree.
Well, should we agendize this as a discussion item for a future meeting?
So we have that item on the agenda for later on. So that would be an appropriate time for you to add future agenda items at the end of the meeting. That'd be a great one. And I'll take a look at the calendars and probably report back to you at the next meeting as to when we might expect bringing that forward. So if I can do all of that, let's maybe do it then, I think. Agenda.
Sounds good.
All right.
So then we will move on to the consent calendar, which this evening consists of the current and advanced planning processing list and the approval of the minutes from our meeting of July 18th. Are there any comments, changes, suggestions, motions?
I'll move that we accept the consent calendar.
I'll second, but I'm going to abstain because I was absent from that meeting. So I haven't seen the video yet.
So we have a motion and we have a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 301. Moving on then to public hearing. Our initial public hearing this evening consists of case number CP0-465 and UP0-411 concerning property at 590 Morro Avenue here in Morro Bay, and I believe that Whitney McIlvaine will be talking to us about this project.
Thank you very much, Chairman and Commissioners. This project is a request for an upgrade and slight expansion to an existing unmanned wireless facility at the corner of Marina and Morro Street, and in conjunction with the Two Dolphin Comfort Inn that's there. The modification is before you because this is in an R2 PD S4 zone. Plan development and the S4 overlay require some additional attention to architecture and view shed. That's really pretty much the purview of tonight's review of this project. I have some slides I can go through. We are recommending approval. This was heard by you June the 21st of last year, and we got fairly tangled up in a long, confusing discussion on RF emissions, which, as you all are certainly aware, is not a basis for any kind of denial of this project. But because it was so unclear, the applicant has brought in Bill Hammett, who is a consulting engineer, and he can answer questions. His letter and review of this project were part of your staff report. So if you have questions like that, we at least can get answers, which is part of your purview to make sure that the project meets FCC guidelines, which it does. So I can run through some slides just to refresh your memory. We have an applicant here, Alexander Liu, can also help answer questions about the project. We are recommending approval of this modification. And so here we go. There's our site at the corner of Marina and Morro. This is I think our zoning maps are kind of confusing, but it is R2 PDS4, as I mentioned earlier. There is quite a bit of residential development surrounding that. It's at the sort of edge of downtown area. A little closer aerial view showing the existing equipment. To the south is Morro. I mean, it's kind of hard to explain that. Near the elevator tower and sort of closer to the lower part of the screen, my little pointer kind of helps you. There are two sectors with antennas around what is an elevator tower, and there's a screen around that. And over on the eastern wall, there are a couple of antennas. The project, so this sort of illustrates that a little more clearly. The project proposes to add an antenna to each sector and replace one in each sector. Oops, let's do this. One of the changes to the exterior of the building is on the east wall. Right now, this is what it looks like. And you can see there's sort of this sloping little 4-foot roof line. Behind that are antennas right now. And the proposed east wall would look like that. The existing roof and the proposed roof, not a big change. That area around the elevator mechanical unit up on the roof expands a little bit and moves back from the Morro Street facade of the building just a bit. This gets a little more technical, and we can go there if we need to. If you have questions, I included these slides. So the existing 2 antennas, the proposed 3, the existing antennas around the elevator, and mechanical equipment on the roof, proposed. This project has been in play for quite a long time. The original proposal had a much larger area expansion of the area by the elevator shaft up front here, and then had, instead of on the wall, had this additional 7-foot tall screened area for new antennas. That was kind of the red flag that caused this project to be in front of you, given the PD and S4 zoning, in terms of view shed and just for architectural review purposes. This was part of the previous plan as well. And there you can see from Main Street, there would have been some blockage of the rock. So the applicant did work with us for a while before we even got here to kind of minimize the rooftop development. I don't think I'm going to go on a whole lot longer. We've seen this before. We have folks that can help answer questions you may have about the project, and I will try to answer them as well. We are recommending approval per the resolution that's attached to your staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney. Let me start out by asking if anyone has ex parte communications to divulge.
I just talked to a neighbor there this last weekend regarding that lived nearby.
And are there any questions for staff at this time?
Wendy, I do have one question. With respect to the installation, if it's approved, notice of that installation Does that in any way appear in the title history of the neighboring lands? Meaning, when subsequent properties are sold, are they made aware through title that? So, do we have any knowledge of what kind of notice future buyers might have, if any? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Not any that I know of. I mean, if they came in and did some research with the planning department and asked about, say, are there plans to expand the hotel or what's going on there? I mean, they could certainly be notified that way, but otherwise, no.
Okay.
So, Whitney, if I'm understanding correctly, the northeast tower, plural, they're behind a new wall which has eliminated some of the articulation on that east facade, right?
Correct.
And then the larger tower to the west, how high additional height is going up on that? From
No
the existing
additional
to the-
height from what's
no additional
existing
height.
right now. That's correct.
Okay, because it looked like it was still going up a bit, but it's got a larger mass of how many feet in the other direction?
Oh, I'm going to make Alexander answer
Okay.
that after he looks at the plans, but it's less than 25% of what's there now, maybe less than 20% of what's there now, seems like.
But in terms of feet, I mean, it's the largest mass on the building at the highest point in the view shed, and it is getting larger than it is
I think
now.
it was I'm going to have to look at the plans, and I will
Okay.
answer that question for you.
All right, thanks.
Whitney, if memory serves, that building that's on the very top, what's the elevator infrastructure or
Yes.
that hardware? If memory serves, that was not permitted in the original approval, and then subsequently it was put in and then had to be approved after the fact.
Roof mechanical was not part of the original Planning Commission approval of the project. That's correct, but they did get a building permit to install that. I mean, it was approved with an elevator, but
that elevator infrastructure should have been down below, right? And then they
well,
ended up putting
typically
it
it
on top.
would be on the roof for an elevator like this, but it was not shown. You're correct.
Okay,
On the Planning Commission plans.
Okay, so
No roof mechanical was shown on Planning
Okay.
Commission plans.
So what's the height limit?
But let me just back up 1 minute here. Subsequently, when the AT&T did get their original approval for an unmanned wireless facility here, that's what was approved. Oh, well, whatever. Let me just go back. Existing. That was approved, and that was looked at. Does that... I mean, so the Planning Commission did approve that installation that you're looking at right there on the screen.
Okay, and what is the height, the maximum height from ground level to top right now? And what is it zoned for? Is it like 25 feet
It's
there?
zoned for 25, and it is 31.5,
Okay.
and they were given a height exception. And height exceptions for roof mechanical is one way that things do get a height exception.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, this is a public hearing item, and so at this point, we'd like to open it up for comments from the public. Please come forward, give us your name, and I'm sorry, yes, we would invite the applicant or applicant's representative to speak first.
Good evening, Commissioner Teft, members of the Planning Commission, staff. Thanks very much. I'm Alexander Liu. I work with Core Development Services. I'm representing AT&T this evening. So yeah, I was here last year. You may or may not recognize me. Thank you very much for this opportunity to represent the project before you. AT&T is, as was explained previously last year, AT&T has upgrades for LTE technology. They're rolling it out in Morro Bay. There was another site at 800 Quintana that was approved for similar equipment upgrades. Not similar in design, but similar in purpose. So AT&T is eager to get our project moving. From last year, just to kind of go over this proposed design, can
Yeah, there you go. I knew that.
So to answer some of the questions that were brought up just now by the commission, there is no increase in existing height. There are no new elements being proposed on the roof. The antennas will remain concealed behind screening, and it will improve Morro Avenue's interface by shifting the screening back from the edge than it currently is right now. The new screens that will be utilized will match the existing roof cornice in design, and it stays within the existing building footprint, and there's no new equipment cabinets or excavations involved with this project. So in this slide here, you can see there's the northwest antenna area, which is around the existing mechanical for the elevator. The northeast antenna area, which is mounted onto the wall, and then AT&T's equipment is within the parking area in the southeast corner of the property. So to answer Commissioner Lucas's question, the existing screen is 11 feet by 13, and it will be shifted back from the edge, still maintain the 13-foot dimension along Morro, but then will increase 1.5 feet towards the interior of the building. So 1.5 feet is what is being added to accommodate the additional equipment that's mounted on the east side of the penthouse. Here's an elevation along Marina Street showing existing and proposed. The height of the screening does not change. And so here's a site photograph of the existing on that corner and proposed.
Oh, that's so much better. Do that again. Oh, sorry.
Okay. And then here's from Marina Street, existing and proposed. And from Main, there's no blockage of the of Morro Rock. And then finally, northeast from Morro Avenue. So the intent here is to integrate an upgrade in technology and improve the aesthetics overall from what is there currently by improving that interface along Morro Avenue and just integrating the existing cornice elements that right now they don't match the existing cornice elements at all. So that being said, as was mentioned earlier, the purview of the Planning Commission is not to take into account radio frequency emissions due to the preemption of Telecommunications Act. But, however, the action items from the previous commission last year was to go back and redo the RF analysis. So that's what AT&T has done, and so we've clarified in the correspondence that we've provided that AT&T will comply with all applicable FCC limits, and we've to that end we've commissioned a new independent analysis that analyzes the project in its entirety, and to that end we've actually have Bill Hammett from Hammett and Edison from up in San Francisco, who could speak to any questions that you may have on the issue, should you have it. But that being said, on behalf of AT&T, I'm asking for your approval tonight. It's been a long time, and we feel that we've answered the questions that you had in their entirety from last year. And so seeing as how we're staying within the development requirements and not increasing the footprint, not increasing the height, and the site holds a valid CUP from before, and we are just upgrading the facility and we're not really expanding it. That's pretty much it. Any questions?
Thank you very much. If you could stick around a little bit, we may have some questions at the end of public comment period.
Absolutely.
Good evening, Chairman Teft, Commissioners. My name is Bill Hammett. I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of California. I manage a firm of 20. We're located up in the wine country north of San Francisco in Sonoma County. Admired all the beautiful wines, beautiful vineyards as we flew in this afternoon. Part of our professional practice is the calculation or the measurement or the mitigation where it's appropriate of radio frequency exposure conditions. We've been doing this for 30 years. I've taken measurements and calculations at literally thousands of sites all over California and elsewhere in the country. McGraw-Hill published the book I wrote on this topic, Radio Frequency Radiation Issues and Standards. And so I wanted to describe for you what we've done in this case. Our clients include wireless carriers. They include cities. We're a peer reviewer for several cities. We work for landlords, helping them integrate designs into their facilities. As engineers, our job is really easy. What are the exposure levels, and how do they compare to the standards? So what we've done here is two things, and I believe you have these documents as part of your packets. One is we did a complete independent analysis on our own based on the materials that AT&T provided on their proposed operation. That's dated April 21st, and you have that. Oh, I have it here on the slides. I'm happy to go through it with you if you would like. The second thing we did was review the materials that had been submitted to you that you looked at a year and a couple months ago. And I watched a bit of that videotape. I can see your frustration over the type of answers you wanted. And so I provided a second document, a second letter, also dated April 21st, that was a simple review of a couple of areas of deficiency in that material that brought about that series of questions. And I have that also on here so we could go through that. You have it, of course, in front of you as well. In addition, I have some materials. This is one slide that I would go through in more detail to talk about radio frequency energy. What is it? What is the EMF spectrum? How do antennas work? What are the standards? Who sets the standards? How they're set? I can go through that material as well. I don't know how much of that you want to go through. Let me say that the earlier slide that was up that talked about the federal preemption, that's a preemption, but the last phrase of that is to the extent that the proposal complies with the federal safety standards. So it's entirely appropriate to ask that question, does it comply with the safety standards? And I know that our work is conservative. We've shown this at measurements by comparing the measurements to the calculations. We know we have conservative factors. So there are few guarantees in life, but I can guarantee that this facility, as proposed, will comply with the federal safety standard. And so I'm at your disposal for what you would like. I think that is the key element, but I know you had specific questions. If you would like, I can go through those. I'm seeing maybe a nod, but, Commissioners, it's at your request if you want to go through it in that detail.
I think we very may well have questions. Typically, we save questions till the end of public comment. If that would be okay with you, I'll allow the rest of the public to speak. And
certainly, I just want to make the key points, which I hope I've made, that this facility is in compliance with the federal safety standard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else who would like to speak to this issue, please feel free. Seeing none, then, we will close public comment, and I will ask if there are any questions for Mr. Lee or for Mr. Hammett. Joe.
I suppose I should apologize because I have surprisingly more questions than I usually have. I guess the first question is for Mr. Hammett. So I'm appreciative that you were able to find some inaccuracies in the first report. And I sort of remember it had something to do with a fairly inflexible program that the first engineers used in their report. That really doesn't mean anything to me. Could you expand a little bit on that?
Certainly. Many people who practice in this field use a standard program called Roof View, and it doesn't allow for anything but a flat surface. So they will calculate at a particular level, And our software that we've developed over the last 30 years, you can define a surface including buildings and slopes and different floors, and then the computer will go through and calculate every tenth of a meter throughout that surface to determine what the actual exposure levels are, the maximum are calculated to be. So the confusion arose because they had labeled one sheet as level at adjacent roof. Well, it wasn't at the adjacent roof. It was done at the elevation of the roof, and it reported the location right in front of the antennas. The distance to the occupational limit for these antennas is 15 feet. So not surprisingly, if you are right up next to the antennas, and that's really the only area where in our report we recommend any mitigation is for workers at the antennas. So we recommend some striping and some signage, very standard recommendations for alerting workers on the roof that there are antennas there and how they should limit their exposure.
Okay. In the Exhibit D that I'm looking at, where it talks about in black for a person on the roof and in blue for a person at the rooftop elevation. Again, I intuitively I was puzzled, so that's why I'm asking. But I see up in the sort of the top right-hand corner in blue, I see a 13% exposure, I guess, but the property closer only has a 5.1% exposure. I was just wondering, I'm probably reading it wrong, but...
No, you're reading it exactly right. And let's go over a couple of the reasons why that relationship holds. One is that the land goes up a little bit in that general direction. So the top floor of that building is higher than the top floor of the building where it's 5.1%. Those blue numbers are the maximum percent at the top floor elevation of those buildings. And so because it's up a little bit higher, what I want to do is show you how that impacts. The bottom picture here shows the shape of the antenna pattern. So the microphone here is omnidirectional. It'll record my voice from any direction because it doesn't have much of a dimension. A light bulb, that's a reading lamp in your home, sends the energy out equally in all directions because it doesn't have much dimension. But the antennas are probably 8 or 10 12 inches wide. That allows the energy to be pushed into a fairly wide group. They call it a direction. They call it a sector. And this facility has 3 different sectors, like the top shows, in order to cover everywhere around the facility. And they do this instead of just having a single antenna that sends the energy equally out in all directions. This is for more efficient. It lets them have one conversation using one frequency in one direction, and they can reuse the frequencies in other directions. But tall, the antennas will be 6 or 8 feet tall, and that allows the energy to be squished down in a very narrow beam and pushed out toward the horizon. That's drawn to scale. So the beam is only 8 or 10 degrees wide out toward the horizon. There's 1,000 times less that goes down than goes out. 30 dB is the ratio. 1,000 times less goes down than goes out. What that means is that the house immediately adjacent is so far below the beam that the calculated levels are lower than for a house that's a little further away. These levels assume no attenuation for the building, which we know occurs. It assumes ground reflection factors that we know are conservative. It assumes full power operation of the facility. So there are a number of conservative factors in there. If we were to go measure, we wouldn't find levels of this size, but even these levels are well below the standard.
Okay. I think, well, I have a couple of questions for Mr. Liu, should I?
That's fine.
So I think this is best directed at Mr. Liu. There's a reference to the applicant having a responsibility to train the people who maintain this periodically, or at least initially. So my question is, employees change from time to time. So is there a mechanism in place periodically to visit the site and train the employees who perhaps are new to the business and weren't trained in the last go-round, so that there's some effort to maintain this training? Is there a process for that?
Are you referring to the employees that would maintain the wireless facility?
No, actually, I'm thinking of the hotel employees who might be painting in the area, and et cetera, who would need to be alerted to how to safely operate around the facility.
In terms of the training element, I saw that as a condition of approval. That would be an arrangement made through the property owner and AT&T to periodically have a mechanism in place to make sure that all workers working on the roof or that would have access to the roof would be properly trained on a periodic basis. So if
okay,
yeah.
So we have to make sure that happens, and again. Referring to the possibility of building a second or a third story, and sort of speculating into the future about that. Again, I'm always interested in sort of process. So there's a neighbor who acquires the neighboring property and decides to build, and assuming that he has been provided adequate notice beforehand that he knows about this installation. Seems to me there has to be some testing now for the stories that he might build, and so I'm curious as to who would initiate the process, who might bear the cost of that. Is that something that the applicant would undertake to make sure that his neighbor next door, who's now contemplating building a second story, is assuaged of his fears, et cetera? I apologize if I'm not being clear on what I'm asking, but do you get what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. To answer the question, and I believe this was explained also last year, if new construction occurred on that neighboring property at any time that resulted in the blockage of our antennas, the antennas work on a line-of-sight principle. So if they build a 3-story or a 4-story building and blocks the antennas, that would, in essence, render that sector of antennas useless. So AT&T would have to come back and either redesign or relocate the site entirely, just due to the fact of that building blocking.
Well, that's not exactly what I'm asking, but it might have been answered by Mr. Hammond. Say the property, again, I realize this is speculative I'm not suggesting that this would be a reason to deny the application. I realize we aren't going to allow speculation as a reason for that. But bear with me. So if someone were to build a second story on the house immediately to the north, should I now conclude that there is no hazard to any of the occupants of that room based on the current information, or would there have to be further testing if and when that second story is built?
I'll defer that to Mr. Hammett.
It would depend on the particulars of what's proposed. The antennas at the location on the east face of the hotel are pushed out toward the street. If they build on their existing footprint, a study at that time would be appropriate, and if that's where they build, then it would still comply with the standard. But I think you're entirely correct that assessment needs to be made at that time based on the conditions that AT&T is running at that time. They may do further upgrades in the years before that happens, and so it would be entirely appropriate at that time to do a specific study for that condition. And if they have to change their facility, and this happens in urban settings quite often where buildings are going up and getting taller, and when that happens, the carriers have to modify their facility. There's no preclusion on somebody improving their own property. The carriers always have to comply, and if if that goes up, then they may have to revise their facility in some way so that it complies. I touched on this briefly in my letter of the 21st as well.
Well, can you answer, though, that new assessment? I take it the carrier probably wouldn't initiate the assessment. That would probably come from the prospective owner. But do you have any idea who might bear the cost of that assessment?
That's really a legal question, which is well beyond my area of expertise. I know that there may be some way through the city to notify, but that's not really my area.
Okay. And then
In fact, could I jump in just
Sure.
Typically, how would AT&T become aware of that development? Would the city notify them? Would the property owner notify you?
I really can't speak to the particulars of how that would happen in a general sense. I'm not familiar with the noticing and so forth from the city, but I understand someone else wants to speak on that.
Good evening. Christine Morro, Director of External Affairs for AT&T. I'm here on behalf of corporate. I am just getting caught up on this issue, but I wanted to specifically address the comment that you brought up. What is the process? So in this case, if there were new construction that commenced adjacent to the existing site, if it were to block our signal, we would, of course, know about that right away. If it did not block our signal, we routinely inspect our facilities annually. And so if it were to become a situation where we were to see that there was new construction next door and take notice of that without notification from the city, then we would be compelled to undertake a study. I will say that we have made an offer to city staff that if they become aware of a permit application and would be willing to advise us of this, we would be happy to undertake a study at that time, and the results of that study may compel us under the FCC standards to make revisions to the site.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have just one more question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I apologize for the questions, but I have one more question, and it might be Mr. Liu. I'm not sure. It's a pretty just basic question. Other than the applicant not meeting the federal emission standards, which would represent a hazard, are there other reasons that the permit might be rejected? Because it seems to me like it's pretty much foreclosed.
Which permit are you referring to?
The
application that's before you now?
Yeah.
I think that would be better directed to staff.
I guess why am I asking the question? Okay. I'll just restate my question. It's as simple as it is. Is there another aside from the applicant at some crazy notion deciding to put it in the middle of a busy intersection? Are there other bases other than simply not meeting the federal standard, the hazard standard for rejecting the permit?
Your only other basis in this case would have to do with view shed blockage or some gross architectural situation.
Right. Okay. So, because from time to time I've advocated that the municipal entities should seek their own independent analysis, and so that they have a better way of vetting the application, if in fact it only has to be at this particular installation. But I would guess that an applicant who's presented with an alternative technical report saying that the applicant could get the same technical results but at a different location or a different configuration isn't under any obligation to accept the results of this foreign report. Would that be an accurate way of sort of understanding the situation?
Do you mind if I clarify that question? Are you talking about a different location, or are you talking about compliance, FCC compliance report? What kind of report are you talking about?
I'm sorry for being confusing. No, well, I'm sort of positing a situation where the applicant has a technical report that says, for a variety of reasons, his installation should be at this location to best satisfy his requirements, and the emission standards are all within the federal guidelines. And just pause it for a second. that there was another independent report that said that the same technical results could be achieved, but in a different configuration or perhaps at a different location. That might all be fine and good, but the applicant is under no obligation to sort of accept the alternative location. That's what I'm getting at.
I'll answer that.
Yeah, no, there would be no obligation to do anything like that. I mean, because it involves not just the analysis, but also their ability to acquire property and lease rights and those types of things. There's a whole bunch of things that go into that. I mean, compelling them to move their facility somewhere else.
Oh, no. This would only be in the case of where no current facility exists. I guess what I'm thinking of is we are limited in our decision making to the applicants who sort of decide what the realm of possibilities are. We might be asked to choose, and most often we're asked to say yes or no to a specific location. In some scenario, we might be asked to choose between one of three, deciding which is the most appropriate. But nevertheless, the choices are not made by us; they are made by the applicant.
Yeah, like with any other application, you would get development the same. You can't apply different standards for them.
The only difference is that this is of a highly technical nature. This isn't a matter of just these are engineering expertise that's
development application, and you need to apply the same standards that you apply to other developments that come before this board.
All right, fair enough.
That's that's the expectation. I mean.
All right.
Yeah, it's like if McDonald's or Burger King came in and they do a market analysis, they identify a site, a property that they could acquire or lease. There's a lot of research that goes into that calculus, into where to locate their establishment, and then they come before Planning Commission with an application, and so to expect McDonald's or Burger King and have another marketing analysis come in and say, well, we've identified 3 other locations that it would be more suitable. That's akin to what you're asking right now, and I don't think that's a standard that's held to other uses.
No, I would agree with that, but at times the presentation is made to this board that the particular site that the applicant is seeking is the only possible site in configuration that will work, which is considerably different than a franchise coming and asking permission to build a restaurant at a particular location.
Yes, I understand that. In many cases, after doing all the research on the back end from a radio frequency engineering perspective and identifying what is the most efficient way to cover an area or meet a service need, and then also layering in, are there interested property owners that would even enter into a lease? And mind you, this is discussion only on a new site build. This application before you is a modification of an existing site, so relocating it or doing an alternative site in itself just doesn't make any sense. So in terms of a new site, in terms of deploying a new site, there's many layers that build on top of it. So it's not just a radio frequency technical analysis, because if that was the case, then the RF engineers would be picking the highest or depending on the site, but they would be cherry picking all the locations, and they do that. They issue what's called a search ring that says, I need coverage here. I need a location in this geographic area, and the geographic area, depending on the topography, could be a mile wide, or it could be narrowed down to a single block. It all depends on network coverage and network needs. So, depending on the application, depending on the applicant, depending on the carrier. They could have gone through and analyzed 5 different locations that were possibilities, but due to factors of too much intervening terrain, too much foliage in the area, no interested party for a landlord, they could just settle down onto one. And then there's only that one that comes before the Planning Commission at that point. You could certainly ask the applicant for what other locations have you considered and what were the reasons why those weren't pursued, but at that point, that's the best that can be done.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Richard, questions?
Yeah, Mr. Hammett, please.
Could you explain just theoretically, when you do your analysis, you're looking at these particular antennas and the radiation that occurs there. Do you do, as you go out, do you do an analysis with other areas that might interface with these EMFs and maybe compound them, or are you just looking at the existing site? You know what I'm saying? And,
yes, I do.
And how does that work? I mean, from a theoretical standpoint.
Sure. Well, I think what you're asking is there an additive element or a cumulative element from multiple sites? And there's no compounding effect. It's just simply additive. If you get 1% from this site and 1% from a different site, you have 2%.
Okay.
It's the total that's the issue. In this case, where we've projected in the block around the facility, this is the predominant source. There are no other sources nearby that would have a strong additive impact. And the inverse square law is, from high school physics, is the key. As you go twice as far away from a source, the power level goes down by a factor of 4. You go 10 times as far away, down by a factor of 100. It's dropping very rapidly as the distance from the site increases.
Okay.
So, yes and no. We examined, is there another source nearby that we should be including, and concluded that there wasn't. And so these are projections just based on this one.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe I'll ask staff.
Yeah.
Where is the closest other site to this location?
Well, there are sites on Quintana, 800 and 1401 Quintana. There are sites at the top of Radcliffe. There are
That's
702 Morro Bay Boulevard, 500 block of Shasta. Yes, anything else? Thank you very much.
The reason why I'm
At the end of Nutmeg, did I mention that on the tanks up there?
Okay, because I have kind of asked for this for a while, is that we as a city need to identify, have a easy way to look at all the sites and how many antennas are at a different location, and we don't have that information at this time. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, that's one of the things that we really need to address. So that way we can, when we look at a project like this, we can get an idea what accumulative effects that we can have. And the other question I have is regarding. Well, that's more of a comment. I'll just leave that.
Michael?
Yeah, Mr. Hammond, if you could go up and look at Exhibit E, the last graphic that's on there, which is the roof plan relative to the locations.
This?
Yeah.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So on the bottom, we have less than public, and there's a green sign, informational. There's exceed public, which is the blue, which is a notice. And then there's an exceed occupational, which is the yellow. So if I look at the configuration of the units on the west side, the left side up there, it appears that the yellow comes from the forward-facing straight out, that sort of focus you were talking about. So those three antennas that are on a 45-degree angle to the south side or north side of that tower, they're projecting more or less linearly out, creating that yellow zone that has the indication on it, right?
Actually, they have more of a bubble shape. If you recall the previous slide, it's about 90 degrees wide, plus or minus 45 degrees coming out.
Okay, because I was going to say the blue then that's identified on the left appears to be a 45-degree angle, like you're talking about.
Exactly right.
That has a much lower sense of radiation, but clearly the frontal creates a zone that has a higher intensity that needs a separate set of warnings associated with it. And I guess my concern is on the right-hand side, it's identified as Y there. But I'm not sure I see anything that says where is that notification to anybody who would be the painter outside or doing roof work on the house next door, whether it's the yellow or the blue indication. Because obviously, if I can look at this, I can see that that southern blue zone at the 45-degree angle goes almost 30 to 35 feet away from the source, which means that at a certain point on the adjacent property, as your paragraph indicates in the letter, the adjacent property owner likely, if these things have similar capabilities as the ones on the west, they're likely bathed in a blue zone and a yellow zone at a certain point above grade. That's what I'm taking as empirically established here. So that Y is never placed on the building to identify that, and until AT&T somehow does this yearly, annual, semi-annual, whatever it is, review, they're never aware of what's happened on the property next door, is what I'm getting.
So there are two questions, if I heard you correctly. Let's deal with the second one first, which is the signage. And the Y sign would go on the face of the building in front of the antennas.
Okay.
But the antennas at that location on the east face of the building are 22 feet above ground.
At this,
The antennas in the other directions, going northwest and southwest, those are only 3.5 feet above the roof.
Mm-hmm.
So very different conditions for somebody walking up to them on the roof at body height versus somebody next door who's 2 stories below the antennas. And so there is no area, if we go to the other figure we looked at before, there is no area on the neighboring property, on the garage, on the roof, inside, and anywhere they go, they're going to be below the federal limit.
Mm-hmm.
That's the limit for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, continuous exposure. They're well below that limit.
Under the existing conditions.
Under the proposed conditions.
Right.
Right.
But if that adjacent property owner would build a structure as tall as the hotel, the upper level of that would seem to be bathed in the yellow and blue for almost the entire width of the property.
And I would agree. And what that means is that if in the future a building is built there, as you described, as the same height as the hotel, clearly AT&T would need to relocate, to do something to provide service in that direction, but they could not operate as proposed once that building were built.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for the public? Then we will bring it back to the commission. Joe, let's start with you again.
Well, this certainly this build out is essential to the life and the prosperity of Morro Bay. So, I certainly in favor of us improving our digital infrastructure. As you can glean from my questions, I'm left with well, actually 3 concerns, but 2 that I'll make explicit right here. And one is the need for ongoing training of the people who will work in and around the hotel. I'll add to that and to make sure that there's proper notice signage so that the neighboring properties or property owners are aware of what they cannot do at various heights. And then, and this next thing is probably not the business of the applicant, but we need some systemic way to alert subsequent owners of the property before they purchase as to the existence of this installation and how it might impact their plans for their properties as well. And I'm also cognizant of the fact that the applicant is a very large organization with an extensive bureaucracy, and it's what might be very time sensitive to a homeowner, might not have the same priority with a large corporate organization. But those strike me as things that are relatively easy to fix and would not stand in the way of the application.
Richard?
My gut feeling is that we've allowed a structure to be put up there, this elevator thing. We've allowed it after the fact. And now we're expanding. Correct me if I'm wrong. Are we making that bigger, that screening with those antennas larger, correct?
The screen around the elevator mechanical on the roof will be 1.5 feet deeper toward the interior of the building.
Okay.
Pretty minimal.
Yeah, but
And it will also step back from the existing facade along Morro, where frankly now it reminds me of when you set the water can on the door, so when someone opens the door, the water falls on you. I really think this will be better. Just saying.
Okay.
Very minor changes up top and for the better, in staff's opinion.
okay, but here's, and this is just my comments where we're at with the city. And I've said this before in a meeting, we need to look at this building out this infrastructure, and we have no mechanism on parameters right now, the way it is right now. Applicant comes in, if somebody agrees on a price to let them put some antennas on their roof, and it's good to go, or depending on the zoning or depending on where we're at. That's not a really a good way to deal with it. And the other thing is the analogies where we were talking about, like Burger King, McDonald's, they don't spill over past the property lines, and this is where these kind of infrastructure actually spills over into the neighboring properties and affects their ability to build.
It actually would not affect their ability to build.
Let me put it this way. That's more of a personal thing, but if a property owner knows that there's an antenna up there, okay, and if he goes up, the neighboring property owner, these figures are no longer valid. These figures are based on existing conditions. So these new figures, there's no mechanism, no trigger by the city that's going to require AT&T to say, hey, look, we got a permit nearby. It didn't even have to be next door or whatever. How much EMFs am I going to be looking at in Junior's room when I get it built up there? We don't have a mechanism to do that right now. Is that
We don't
correct?
right now. We could fashion a condition for you all to let you continue with your comments, so I don't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, I mean, for the adjacent residents, it'd be simple enough to put a memo in the file so that anytime development were to happen, staff would see it. Moving forward, we'll have our tracking system would allow us to do this to properties in and around the adjacent. We'd be able to flag it through that. Right now, we don't have it up and running. We're in the process of implementing it. But before we got there, we would be able to put a memo in the file that simply, anytime an application happens on a piece of property, we go look in the file to go see what's happened there before, what's the previous approvals. It's part of the kind of standard operating procedure for reviewing applications.
Okay, so let me just ask you, Scott, because I need some clarity on this. Okay, so as you move along, okay, from this, and we move along, and you have a tracking system. Okay, so somebody wants a thing, you have a condition in here that says, hey, flag this. We just have is that
essentially? Yeah. We're able to place notes on properties, like you can flag them for issues.
Okay.
And so then you can go in there and you would see them. So that would be the same thing. Like, so before I came here, I was at a tracking system when I was in Pismo. We regularly we'd attach documents when there were things, that we wanted to notify adjacent property owners about if something X, Y, or Z were to happen. And we would place those notes in the tracking system, so you would pull it up and see it. And oftentimes we'd place memo and file. We'd do both. Memos in the hard file, and then flag the tracking system, and a copy would also go electronically as associated with that file. So moving forward, even if you were to change your tracking system, once you download all that information and put it into your new tracking system, all that information goes with it, including all associated documents. So we'll have that capability. I mean, we're probably going to be testing it out in October-ish, I guess, maybe. So we're to that point right now. So we're getting ready to set up training stuff for staff. So.
Okay, so that's encouraging. Mm-hmm. And then the other question I have is, in the event of something like that, if an applicant wants to build a second story, and then they get flagged, they say, hey, you have an antenna in here. We did a test over here. It was 2.3 or whatever it was. Who are they going to be able to just call AT&T and then just get?
We could tell them about it and have them and their representatives contact AT&T, but probably better if the city contacts AT&T and says, hey, we have an application for a house over here. We need you to rerun the study to see what impact it's going to have based on the proposed house and the design, and get that information back.
That'll be AT&T's.
And they're required to comply. So they would have to do it. So they would have to.
That's part of the safety law.
Correct. Yeah. So they would have to prepare the analysis like they would for a regular application that you have before you this evening, and similar to that, they'd be required to do that though. So
okay.
They're compelled to.
Okay.
By the law. So.
All right. Thank you.
Not just Morro Bay. So, all right.
I guess this is another question for staff. I mean, I'm not aware of any of these installations that we've been seeing in the last few years that had this level of demonstrable potential impact on another property within the zoning envelope that the other property has to build. Seems like we've always been on hills where the adjacent property, the installations on Quintana that were on the roof were next to the trailer park that was downhill, and I'm thinking the ones that have been co-located on the existing towers and antennas, and the ones that were on the city infrastructure, and the ones that have been looked at even within the pair of churches that were near the residential neighborhood. None of those, because they were on a steeple, if I'm recollection is. This is the first time I think I've seen one where we're really looking at another, in my opinion, step down the slippery slope, where this is putting something on in the realm of real possibility on a neighboring property. And if I'm doing due diligence on a property search, how do I find out that this condition is there? Do we have public record access to the building codes? So a typical real estate transaction, if someone was asking due diligence of their agent, they have access to files like this to check.
Absolutely. They have access to any approvals that occurred on a piece of property. Mm-hmm. They have access to our any building permits that were issued. That's a very common thing that realtors come in and ask about. They can access those same records for adjacent properties. Absolutely. And I agree with you. I can't think of another project in Morro Bay that kind of raises the same issues that this one is right now that we're discussing. But certainly in other cities with other wireless, infrastructure, this has come up again and again. And they are required. I mean, we did raise this issue, and that issue came up the last time at your review of this project, and they are required to comply with FCC rules. That is absolutely true. No lawyer in the country could really argue against that. And we have mechanisms to put notices in our files per specific addresses, and if your commission would like, we can add a condition that something, we can talk about that in the event the city receives a complete application for redevelopment of the property to the east. The city shall notify AT&T to reassess emissions in light of the proposed development and make changes as needed to ensure continued compliance with FCC rules. I mean, AT&T just offered that at the podium, so this is not an unusual occurrence, but it is the first time that I can think of that we've addressed this in Morro Bay.
I would also respond to the initial portion of your question. Our staff in planning spends a significant amount of their time responding to inquiries from folks that are either directly looking to purchase homes or from their realtors. It's a daily occurrence. So.
Well, I know it would be if I was certainly looking at a property. I'm just not sure what's common all the time. And then I guess the other question I have is, what's the nature of the sign and where exactly is it located on that east elevation? Because if it's up in the air where the antennas are, you're already up there getting the radiation dose when you're reading the sign.
So the signs be very visible from down below.
So is it at grade? Like we would post a sign on a building where one could see it when one was walking? If I drive up with
it would have been normally it would be posted up higher where you start to get into the area of concern for exposure. And I think that was spelled out fairly clearly, and I'm pretty sure there are exact regulations on where these signs go. I know when I went out to the site just to look at what's existing there now, there are signs everywhere, including up to the roof access, on the roof, on the structure down at ground level that sort of encloses has their support facilities. That's pretty well regulated. It probably would have been really good to have an exhibit that showed you exactly where that's going to go.
So we can ask for a sign that says something like radiation hazard above plus X number of feet above grade.
I'm going to let the applicant's representative answer that, because I'm sure they deal with that all the
applicant's
time.
representative is not the staff that's telling us what we are allowed to do relative to our
I don't.
So, point taken. But I think it would be appropriate to ask how they would address the issue that you just raised. Right? How does the existing signage deal with the issue that you're raising?
Well, okay.
And if it doesn't, then we should add a condition that does that.
Well, you might add a condition at least to vote on anyway. So that would be fine to have the applicant speak to that.
Would the applicant like to respond to that?
So I will say that we comply with all requirements for signage. So I'll start there. You're asking for additional signage, and I'm sorry, I don't have a totally clear idea of what you're referencing. If you're looking for something ground level regarding radiation, I will tell you that that signage, to my knowledge, does not currently exist. We would have to take that back and consider whether or not that is something we've done elsewhere. To my knowledge, we have not. There's been a lot of litigation around signage, so I'm not comfortable agreeing to that term, but I can tell you that we comply with existing laws regarding the signage for any potential emissions associated with this project. I believe you might be asking for something above and beyond that.
I guess what I'm asking is, you're opposed to having a sign at ground level where someone with a truck that might be coming to service the exterior of this building or an adjacent structure, or let's say trim the tree that somebody might plant in the adjacent homeowners.
Right. I am not saying I'm opposed to that. I am saying we comply with all regulations regarding signage.
All right.
So how about this? What sign on that side of the building does that? What sign on that side of the building would alert anybody to the concern that was raised by Commissioner Lucas?
Do you have information on that? I'll defer to the person who's specifically working on this particular project.
The different carriers all have slightly different versions of the same sign. The key for the yellow is that the word caution appear. This is part of the standard on signage. It has to have the standard international symbol for radio frequency energy. It has to say caution. It has to describe what the potential hazard is and provide information for someone who wants to access that area. So typically it would be a sign about this size with all that content, and would provide the stated distance from which would be 15 feet. And anybody who is at that elevation and getting close to that is going to see that sign from that distance. Presumably anybody who is working on that building has received the training that has been discussed and understands what those signs mean. In case they don't, it's really very clear in plain language.
I don't have anything else, Dr. Tuff.
Just one question for staff or for AT&T. After this installation is put in, will there be actual on-the-ground measurements of what the radio frequency radiation levels actually are?
I believe that's a condition included in your resolution. Condition number 6 under planning, a post-construction RF compliance report shall be submitted prior to final inspection.
Excellent, thank you. Then, with regard to construction in the vicinity, I don't know, we've sort of been concentrating on the two houses to the east. Mm-hmm. I think that may be, for me, that's a little specific. I would like to see a condition that indicates that
any adjacent property.
Whenever an application is received for construction within 100 feet of any antenna that would increase the height of the existing structure, the city shall notify AT&T, and AT&T will provide an evaluation of projected RFC levels at that site. Because we're not just dealing with, in a sense, in a regulatory sense, we are just dealing with FCC standards. But we're also dealing with the public, and the public may say, if I build up to 22 feet and I have a roof deck, I'm going to get 60% of the FCC maximum. That's a little uncomfortable for me. I think I'll leave the roof deck out. To me, I would like to see a more general notification policy than just those two properties to the east. And third, I would like to see, and this doesn't have to do with this particular report, but we're dealing with these projects as if they're individual projects. To me, it's like a guy who has 50 lots, and he comes in one lot at a time and says, I want to build this house, and then I want to build this house, and then I want to build this house, and we never get to look at the big picture. So I would like to see one of the requirements accompanying these applications. I'd like to see a requirement that the company making the application provide the city a map which shows the location of all existing facilities, all existing antennas within the city or within a half mile of the city limits, together with photographs of those installations. And I think by doing that, eventually, there's not that many carriers. I think eventually we'll build up a very comprehensive idea of where these sites are and what the pattern of distribution is. And I say this because right now, when we look at this application, we have no idea if there are neighborhoods within the city, and I'm talking primarily about visual blight. We have no real way of knowing if there are certain neighborhoods within the city that are being unduly, impacted, that have, like 5 times as many of these antennas as other areas. So I agree with Richard. I think we need to start requiring that information so that we can look at this on a broader basis than simply one project at a time. I will say, I will go on record as saying, with the notification provision for projects that might increase the height of adjacent structures, I will support this application. I don't see I don't see a great objection. I would perhaps like to see Commissioner Lucas's concern about a methodology for informing people who might be working in the area before they get up in the bucket truck and see the flag there that says, "Oh, you've been fried already." Perhaps Commissioner Lucas would like to propose some language regarding that.
No, I just think I see plenty of places where people have a caution before they enter the zone of caution. I mean, I think that's the whole idea of having these rooftop signs before you get onto the roof. It's near the hatch. I think something should be on grade that says that if you are going to go above this point, their caution should be exercised relative to, it could be as explicit as cell phone antenna installation, sea management, something like that. Something has to be, and I'd be willing to let staff work that out, but I think something needs to be on that wall, not on the other side, saying you're getting close. No, it should be below. Say above this point. And I think it should say, when I see something that says above, I think, well, is it 8 feet, 10 feet? No, approximately, whatever, 20 feet, 22 feet, whatever it is, above this point is a potential hazard from whatever you want to call it. It could be a cautionary statement of some type. I don't want some gardener or painter or tree trimmer or whatever to have a problem. Plus, I like the idea of the notifications we're talking about in the record have to be extremely clear. And I like the idea of the map, the holistic map.
And I agree with Commissioner Teft's notion that someone contemplating an upper story might modify his design, even though he knew that the emissions fell well within the safety regulations of the federal government. But I would carry it even further in that I can imagine prospective owners who might contemplate moving on to something else where they didn't have those restrictions. But I, for one, have no idea how things are, who decides and what things are put in the record of title. And I don't know how that gets in there, but I would hope that somebody was contemplating buying a piece of property, and this strikes me as a really relevant piece of information, at least to a sizable chunk of the population, and they ought to know before they plug down a sizable amount of their fortune on what might be a final home. And again, I just reiterate the notion of ongoing training for the people in the hotel staff as well. I just said, and with respect to the notion of title, I mean, this, we insist that notions of easement be put into the line of title, a sort of a right of another property owner to in some way invade the adjacent property. And I wouldn't go so as to characterize this as an invasion, but as Commissioner Lucas is saying, this is certainly an intrusion by means of these electronic transmissions into the property of another, and it seems just worthy of being placed in the line of title.
Yeah, I to follow up on what you're saying. Oh, go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
All I was going to say to that commentary is we have no way to compel neighboring property owners that don't have an application before the city to record any sort of information related to their title. There's no way. We have no way to compel that.
But if we eventually develop these maps that show the location of cell towers, it seems to me that would be an important tool for people. And the other issue is, and this is just an observation, but my experience is that the situation where somebody buys a piece of property with the intent of building up is relatively uncommon. It's most usually the guy that's lived there for 10 years and he's now got 2 more kids than he used to have, and he needs another bedroom upstairs. That, you know.
The only thing I'd say about that, Dr. Teft, is this is part of our downtown that we're encouraging people to come in and build, some of the upper level housing and things like that. I think it's a prime property to consolidate some of these smaller parcels and do something larger. I mean, I think it's very much a potential.
It's true.
And, based on what you said, it does affect property value for the neighboring. And I like that analogy that you use, like an easement analogy, because it does affect, it's an aerial maybe issue, but it does have an effect on the neighboring property values. And regarding the caution notice, Commissioner Lucas saying, I think that putting it in a freight elevator or something like that might be an idea, because well, that's a different story. I'll let that go. It's the policy. It's a policy. It's like what we need is a policy. And we don't have it because we're setting conditions for an individual project, but what we're lacking is a policy.
You referred, Chair Teft, to the mapping concept, and I would say you should probably add a condition to this one that they provide us a map of all their facilities in town right now. So we can start. So we're starting the map off with AT&T. And their facilities, and we'll have them provide their map a map of their facilities within town. And would you say within a half mile of the exterior? Yeah. So,
and you can work out whatever media you need that to start as a layer on the city's plan.
That's kind of the idea. So I mean, you're talking about it. I think it's a good idea, and we can start with this one, and the next one that comes in, we'll get it from them, and then pretty soon we'll have, like you said, there's not a whole bunch of them, so pretty soon we'll have a map of everything. So I think it's a good idea. If you want to, maybe consider adding that condition. I would recommend that.
Agreed. So, just to recap, we have requirement for notification to AT&T by the city, and a response from AT&T for any construction that increases the height of structures within 100 feet of any antenna. We have the requirement that AT&T will provide a map of all existing antenna facilities within the city limits or within a half mile of the city limits. We have a requirement that AT&T will provide a notice in the form of a sign mounted at ground level that specifies the existence of a RFC hazard above and the approximate height of the same. Am I missing anything?
There's the issue again of training. If the applicant feels it's appropriate to train these employees, it's reasonable that there's going to be an ongoing need for training periodically.
So we have a condition requiring training now. Can we modify that to say AT&T will be available for retraining of new employees as necessary?
I would just have to sort of reiterate that being on site to look at the current facility, I mean, there's signage everywhere. Unless you're completely illiterate in 2 languages, you couldn't miss that there's, only certain, the hatch to the roof facility, which is probably one of the most dangerous places any employee could get, and most employees general, unless they were doing maybe repair work. It's very clear that you don't go there without training, or you're not a certified, you haven't been certified to be near that equipment that's up on the roof. I mean, there's signage everywhere. So I'm just not sure, I'm unclear about this whole training thing and how we would monitor that and who would be responsible. That would seem to be more the responsibility of the hotel owner than, I can't quite see how this is going to work out.
Well, let me respond since I brought it up. I might even be willing on the basis of the signage to accept that training isn't necessary, but I'm just repeating the logic. If we say training is necessary, then by logic, ongoing training is necessary periodically, because I don't understand how you could train people initially and then have, based on need, and then have no assurance that future employees would be adequately trained. So either we
the condition.
Yeah, either we don't do training or we have continuing training, it seems to me.
I mean, presumably people that work on the equipment are familiar with what they're getting themselves into. And it's hard to imagine, I don't know, if I'm housekeeping, what am I supposed to be learning about? Or, I mean, what are we expecting in terms of training? Basically, training would be stay away from the antennas, and that's sort of provided by the signs and the fact that it would be really difficult to get there. You know what I mean? I think this was kind of maybe a concern that sort of got blown out of proportion earlier, and now we're making it worse, is my fear as a staff person. Sorry.
What would be the procedure? Anybody can answer this. What would be the procedure, for example, if the roof developed, if it was a rainstorm and the roof developed a leak in that yellow zone? What is the owner supposed to do?
I think that's a great question, and I'd love to hear from AT&T how they handle that.
We actually do a lot of training. There are rules for what the content should be for the training and so forth. Typically what happens is we train any staff members who have occasion to go up there, not housekeeping, because I'm sure that's not part of their duties to go through the hatch and get up onto the roof. So the manager of the site would be there, participate in the training, and any current staff members who would go up. Sometimes they'll bring in a contractor. So yeah, we have the HVAC guys come out on a regular basis, and they'll come over. So we may have a room full of people that get trained. But there's an ongoing responsibility for the manager of the facility, the property owner, to not send people into areas who aren't trained. And we leave them with enough materials, and typically as long as the manager is there, there's no need to come back. Occasionally we'll get a call from somebody who says, gee, all our records are gone, we've got questions, so we'll come back in and do a fresh training, but it's typically with a new management company that's come in. So your question had to do with the leak. The signs are really explicit. If you go in this area, call this phone number and have them shut down the antenna. And I'm sure that's in their lease. Again, not an attorney, I don't know, but I'm sure it's in their lease with their landlords that for building maintenance purposes, emergency purposes, they can call that number and they'll shut down that set of antennas for maintenance work. But part of the training is so that people know, that the workers know that they can work in the blue area without any restriction. It's only in the yellow areas, and that's why they're separately identified. The official term is a notification area and a prohibited area. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm just wondering, I guess what I'm wondering is, with the initial training, the signage, would then the written materials be adequate as opposed to like recurrent face-to-face training?
I think the issue with the recurring thing is certainly we could put that into the condition, but it's literally unenforceable. I mean, the only time it would come into play is if something happened there and we're like, oh, you didn't comply with your condition. It's fairly weak. So there's something, I mean, some responsibility is put upon the folks that are managing the hotel that have the facility, that have agreed to lease the portion of the facility to AT&T. You know, there's an obligation there to follow the requirements of having that facility in your hotel. I mean, some of it has to be placed on the owners of those properties. City can't be responsible for everything. So I think having the training requirement is good, and I think, yeah, you know, I think similar to what the last speaker indicated was that, you know, if they had a changeover and they needed additional training, they would ask for it, because there would be people that were unfamiliar with what the requirements were to put people on the roof. I mean, I think they would know that. They're like, that's an issue. It says we're supposed to call AT&T on all the signage, so we should probably do that. And, you know, I mean, then that happens. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. The ongoing thing is fine. We can put it in there if it makes you feel more comfortable. I just don't know that we're going to be going around, you know, making sure that they're doing that. I don't have staff. I mean, literally don't have staff for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Nice try.
And this is really directed, these conditions are directed at AT&T, not at the hotel. Because I would say, you know, the alternative would be just to say the hotel owner has to maintain a file or a notebook with all information relative to the antennas. But it can't go in here.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's good. I think it's good to have the training requirement in there, and I think for them to have initial training is important. The ongoing thing is certainly fine, happy to add it. There's not, the follow-up mechanism probably isn't really there for us. So, I mean, that's all I'll just leave it at that. And you can make your decision as you will.
Well, I personally, I am not in favor of putting in regulations that we know we're not going to follow. I mean, that doesn't do a lot for the city's credibility, in my opinion. Thoughts? Thoughts to the right?
I don't think it's our obligation to create legislation or rules that are foolish, but I also don't think it's bad to put something in there that makes sense, to just restate something that makes sense. I mean, so ongoing training to me is not a bad thing. Yes, Scott's not going to check, let me see the training file. But if something would happen down the line and we said, well, we thought there should be ongoing training, it's something that somebody can say, well, somebody wasn't maintaining this facility the right way. You know, even the Planning Commission thought there should be ongoing training. And so to me, it's not a bad thing to seat it there, even though we can't do much with it.
And I would add that it's not uncommon for legislative bodies to pass legislation without a real enforcement provision in it. You know, it's not a good idea, but it does happen from time to time. So.
I'll give you a little story. I was a field engineer, and we used to have these rocket engine tests next to us, and they would vent some hydrogen gas every so often. And hydrogen is dangerous at 8 parts per million. Well, you can't smell until 15. So when you smelled it, you're already zapped. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what I think with a good signage and some training can, at least you know what you're getting into. And anybody that, I don't know and I hear what you're saying, I don't know how we as a body can anyway force people to study and force people to learn, but I'm not opposed to having something there just to say, hey, listen, this is an area where of concern that is, and it goes back to, this is almost like we're looking at this project, but this is typical of everything, all of them. And I would like to see, like, any application that comes to us, they say, okay, Verizon comes up. Okay, these are all our cell towers in the city. AT&T comes up, before we even look at one, these are all of them, and then we want to do this at this point. I like Dr. Teff's idea of requiring the carriers to come up with that, so we don't have to spend city staff locating this. They can give that to us. So,
But what about the ongoing training issue?
Ongoing training, having some language in there, I don't think is a bad thing.
Okay, I think the consensus is some language, yeah. Ongoing training is appropriate, or whatever. So do we have a meeting of the minds here? Do we have a motion?
Well, let's see. I move that we adopt Resolution PC 21-17 concerning conditional use permit CPO 465 and what is that, UPO 411 with the
We had noticing ongoing training, the ground level signage, cautionary signage, and the requirement that this applicant submit a map of AT&T facilities with the building permit for this project. The other deal was direction to staff that applications in the future for cell sites include a map of all of that carrier's sites within the city and within a half mile in the future. So that's what my notes say. I would ask for some clarification on just the notification per se. So you said something to the effect of within 100 feet of existing antennas. What is it that you want us to do? Notify AT&T that there is this development project?
Notify AT&T and obtain an estimate of RF levels at the site of the proposed construction, maximum RF levels at the site of the proposed construction. And this is only for construction that would increase the height of the existing structures.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion and we have a second. Do we have any discussion on the motion? If not,
One thing, when you say all, I was thinking all cell sites in the city, not just within 100 feet.
I'm not all cell sites in the city.
I mean, all the carriers, like AT&T within, you're looking at just within 100 feet?
By the carrier that's in front of you.
Yeah, notify the carrier. Thank you very much. Yes,
yeah,
thank you.
That's what I meant. Yeah, not any other company, but yeah, AT&T.
well, no, okay, no, I'm confused now, because I was speaking to this particular application because of what we have. So that would only be for this cell site, not for all of them in the city. But the map is for all of the city and within a half mile of city limits.
But I think anything that comes forward that has this kind of influence on adjacent properties, I would say we want to have that kind of clause suggested by the city.
Yeah, we're going to use this.
Gotcha.
This is good. We're going to use this as the template to
Template.
start from. Yeah. So that's good. I mean,
Okay, so just so I'm clear, okay, AT&T will provide where all their cell sites are within the city, within a half a mile of the city. Okay.
Any additional discussion? If not, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Ingravia,
Yes.
Commissioner Sadowski,
Yes.
Commissioner Lucas.
Yes.
Chairman Teft.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we're almost at 8 o'clock here. Let's take a brief recess till 8:10. Good evening. We're back with you, and welcome back to the Planning Commission meeting. Our next item up for discussion is item number B2, public hearing B2, concerning case number CP0-546, UP0-484, and AD0-121, involving a property at 2101 Sunset Avenue here in Morro Bay. And I believe that Joan is going to speak to us on this.
Thank you kindly, Chairman Teft, and good evening, gentlemen and the public. The next item before you this evening is a request for coastal development and conditional use permit approval with an associated parking exception for the development of a detached accessory dwelling unit to accompany an existing non-conforming single-family residence. The property is located within the R2 duplex residential zone outside of the Coastal Commission Appeals jurisdiction and lies to the north of Highway 41, south of Avalon Street, west of Ironwood Avenue, and east of Main Street. The 5,000 square foot parcel is directly adjacent to a commercial storage facility that fronts on Main Street. This is the existing residence as seen from Sunset Avenue. The aerial image on the right illustrates the proposed location of the accessory dwelling unit and its proximity to the commercial storage facility to the west. The existing residence is considered non-conforming with regard to the south side yard setback at 2 feet 9 inches, where 5 feet is the minimum requirement. The existing parking situation is also non-conforming due to the single car garage, where 2 covered and enclosed parking spaces are required. This is the existing floor plan showing the single-car garage. No changes to this existing structure were initially proposed. However, due to the closet that encroaches into the garage, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission add a condition to Resolution 22-17 that requires the applicant to remove this encroaching closet. So here is draft language for the additional condition of approval could read as follows. The applicant shall remove the closet currently located at the rear of the existing single-car garage to create one compact, covered, and enclosed parking space within the minimum interior dimension of 9 feet 7 inches by 17 feet. This is the proposed site plan, which shows the location of the proposed accessory dwelling unit at the rear of the lot. The proposed structure conforms to all provisions of the zoning ordinance. Also illustrated on this site plan is the 23-foot, 7-inch long driveway that is more than adequate to park a vehicle completely outside of the public right-of-way. This is the proposed floor plan of the 625 square foot prefabricated accessory dwelling unit that complies with all development standards, including setbacks, height, lot coverage, as well as the utilization of materials customarily used for conventional dwellings and the placement of the structure on a permanent foundation. These are the elevations. The proposed color and materials were chosen to match the existing single-family residence at the front of the lot. Therefore, it is staff's recommendation that the Planning Commission approve the requested coastal development and conditional use permits with the associated parking exception for the proposed development by adopting Planning Commission Resolution 22-17, subject to the findings and conditions of approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will again ask if there are any ex parte communications to divulge?
I talked to a neighbor. That's all.
Okay. And are there any questions for staff at this time? Seeing none, then, we will open public comment. As usual, we invite the applicant or applicant's representative to speak first. So come forward. We'd love to hear from you.
Good evening, Commissioners. I just want to say that I just bought this. Well, I bought this house around a year ago, and we're just developing the house and making it a great, affordable family unit in the back. Currently, I do live in San Jose, and I'm planning on moving on down here next year with my family. And this is a place where we want to live and grow our kids. That's all I have to say. Oh, one more other thing. I'm so sorry. Joan has been absolutely amazing to myself and to my family. We come from a very large city, and my dad's a general contractor. So we deal with the cities and the counties a lot, and just to have the access to have Joan, and we're able to talk to her, and anytime we pick up the phone, she's usually really accessible, and we just really appreciate that. And it's really nice to have somebody like that on our side. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate her as well. Are there any questions for the applicant? With that, then, let's close public comment, bring it back to commission, and Michael, why don't you start us off on this one?
Yeah, well, I just appreciate that you're buying the home and doing some things to it to add value. This is a real tough area right behind the storage units, and I think anything we can do to get people in this part of the city. We've got access to transit, we've got access to schools, we've got access to stores. We're trying to increase the retail capability. A lot of your neighbors already have a much higher lot coverage than you have. A lot of them have taken advantage of the fact you can do a lot with landscaping here too, and so I would hope at some point, I don't want to condition it, but I would hope you would try to do some things there. My only caution, this is more of a comment, it's nothing to condition it, is the parking in that part of town is brutal. And, Avalon is so overparked and is really tough. So I would just say, please, I like the provision that staff is talking about, because I think it's important we try to keep the cars off the street as much as possible. When you have guests and things, that's fine. So it's a parking impacted area, because I walk and don't live. I think I must be out of the area by a little bit to be casting my vote tonight. But
Correct.
yeah, I'm in favor of the proposal.
Richard.
Yeah, I have a couple friends that live in that area. I like this area, and I like the scale of your project.
Joe?
Yeah, likewise, I appreciate the fact that we're getting some of these secondary units in neighborhoods that need it, trying to alleviate the affordable housing issue. And the fact that you have parking, off the street, which is fine. I for one, I sometimes can't visualize these things as well as I should be able to. So I'm looking at the exterior rendering, and I kind of wish I had a little better idea of what it looked like. But I'm okay with that.
Well, this is, I guess, a little bit closer call for me than for the rest of the commission. In the first place, the most recent accessory dwelling unit ordinance passed by the council specifies that the maximum size for an accessory dwelling unit is 50% of the size of the main building, and this is about 65%. However, I had a discussion with Joan today, and the ordinance as passed by the council has not yet been certified by Coastal Commission, so we're actually not bound by that ordinance at this point. So I am, I think if it were 385 square feet or whatever, it would pretty much preclude having a two-bedroom unit. And I think a two-bedroom unit is probably more useful in terms of meeting the city's housing needs than a one-bedroom unit. So I'm inclined to go with that one. Parking. Currently, we do not have a viable enclosed parking space. But if that closet is removed, it's probably usable. I would like to see the word compact removed from the condition because there is no such thing as a compact enclosed parking space. That's a term that applies to outdoor parking spaces. But I also, and you've probably heard me express this before, you're probably tired of it, I have great reservations about tandem parking, particularly in a situation where there are potentially two unrelated occupants of a piece of property. And so you've got your car's in the garage and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you realize that you have to have a Slurpee. Are you going to go next door and ask the guy to move his car out of the parking space so he can go get a Slurpee? I think.
So I would note that current, because of the state law changed, that they're not required to have a parking space for the secondary unit.
They're not, but realistically, they got to park someplace, right?
Yeah. I mean, but you can imagine that their parking space for that unit in the back is likely going to end up on the street versus in the driveway where the primary folks live, is my thought.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. However, okay, what is available is there are 2 parking spaces at the front of the property, partially in the right-of-way, partially out of the right-of-way, which, in my opinion, are probably the 2 most functional parking spaces at the site. I think that's what will be utilized in front of the fence there. And in fact, when I was by there this afternoon, that's exactly where the car was parked. So I think all in all, it's a situation that is workable, and so and also I'm influenced a little bit by the fact that I think that as we move forward with our new zoning ordinance, we're going to be looking at more flexible parking solutions than what we specify now. So yeah, I'm going to support the project, but I kind of felt that I had to express my rationale and some of the reservations. One question I have for staff. When we measure the distance from this site to the nearest transit stop, how is that being measured?
I utilized the ruler tool on Google Earth and went from their parcel up the street, down the street, and over to the stop. So it's fairly not extremely accurate, but it's well within probably less than a tenth of a mile. It could be the mistake there. And it's so well within that half a mile requirement that
it wasn't.
So we're measuring it by shortest pedestrian distance, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
not as the bird flies.
Okay.
It's up the street
Excellent.
and down.
Excellent.
Yeah, no.
I would like to endorse that.
Okay.
And to make that our preferred method in the future, because that's what the state law is really talking to. It's talking to accessibility of public transport. And if you have, for example, a project that's on the south side of Highway 1 and it's a quarter of a mile from the transit stop, but you have to go a mile and a half either way to get to the to get across Highway 1,
Yeah.
it doesn't do any good. So excellent. I appreciate that. I use the directions in Google, and it came out 0.4, so
Nice.
pretty close.
Good thing to do that.
So with that,
You educated me on something. Maybe you can speak to that. On this percentage of secondary unit, what is it, 50, the thing that got passed by this? Okay, that issue. Is there is there something that says the size of the house, and then there's 50% of the existing home, right? Because here's what my concern is. If you have a small house and you want to put a secondary unit, you know, it kind of like penalizes you for keeping your house small. Is there some kind of...
It would give you, I mean, if you follow that, the rationale that was in the ordinance that was passed, yes, it would be less. We have an existing ordinance in place right now, and not all of it is precluded based on the recent changes to state law. Some of it's still in place. It's the ordinance from 1997, thank you. And doesn't have that same limitation on it. That's the ordinance that basically that's the rules we have to play by now. Yes, we were going to do something else, but we couldn't get that through the process before the state changed the requirements. And so we're left to use the ordinances that we have that are in place. We kind of have to. So.
I get that. No worries there. But after it changes, if somebody wanted to, let's just. Oh, sorry about that. After the law changes, and a situation arises where somebody has a small house and wants to build a secondary unit, and let's say their secondary unit is like 62 or 65% of the existing small house, is there a provision that like a variance that they would be able to get, or is there something that it's pretty much hard and fast?
It'll just depend on what the ordinance ends up saying. There's discretion involved in the amount. So we can apply similar standards. The question is, do you want to? I mean, it's actually okay. You have a relatively small house, and you can have a relatively small secondary unit. That would be fine. I mean, I think it's almost 400 square feet. That's an okay, single person type unit. You're getting a little crowded when studio type situation. It's probably fine, but but it wouldn't account for the situation that Chair Teft referred to, and this has a 2-bedroom. It's kind of unique. You don't usually see too many of them. That are 2-bedroom. Usually they're 1 or studio. So I mean, it's kind of nice to have different products out there, in my opinion. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but the ordinance as passed by the council had not been altered to reflect current state law. Is that?
Yeah, we had it updated to reflect the last change in state law,
but not the new one.
And in fact, it changed a couple of times in the ordinance that we had completed. When I got here, I looked at it and said that it's not consistent with state law anymore. We can't send that up. Or we did send it to them, and I withdrew it because it wasn't consistent. And then we updated it, and then we got it through our process, sent it back up, and then state law changed January 1. I was like, okay, well, we're just in this vicious loop, but we're updating our zoning code now, so we're going to wrap it into that at this point. So.
I think, too, most of the typical houses, you correct me if I'm wrong, that are coming through here, I mean, the threshold these days is probably somewhere around 1,800 square feet and up. So I think the 50% was more about, as they're starting to approach 1,000 square feet, we don't want to get too much higher than that. So I think this is a modest home on a modest lot. And yeah, it exceeds, but that's okay because I think it seems like it works with the density of the neighborhood, and especially given the fact it's behind the commercial. That's why I can sort of look past some of our residential design guidance. This is an extremely clean, small house. There's no detail at all in it, but its context suggests that that's all right. It's not even visible from the street.
Yeah,
it's not visible from behind.
Architecture is not dissimilar to that of the existing house. It's fairly
very
plain.
simple,
Yeah,
very simple, very plain. So I don't have any trouble with this one because of the context, but I do think I also don't have trouble with the size of this dwelling because I think the intent was to avoid those ones that are getting up around 900, 1,000 square feet as opposed to this one in our smaller lots.
Yeah, the existing ordinance has an absolute ceiling of 900. So if you have a 4,000 square foot house, you can still only have a 900. And it's, we could consider when it comes before us putting an absolute floor in too. So if you have a 650 square foot house, say you could have 400 feet, that would be a floor on the, there's a number of ways to do it.
Yeah.
With that, then, do we have a motion?
Are you going to do it? Okay. No, you get it. Okay, do it. All right.
I'll do it. Okay, I'm going to try doing this. Okay, make a motion to approve Resolution PC 22-17, a resolution of Morro Bay Planning Commission approving conditional use permit UPO 484 and coastal development permit CPO 546, allowing a detached secondary dwelling unit to a non-conforming residential structure and approving the parking exception ADO 121 to allow a second open uncovered space in tandem in the driveway at 2101 Sunset Avenue, with the additional condition of removing removal of the closet that's there.
I'll second.
And getting rid of the compact language.
And removing the word compact.
And removing the word compact from the parking.
Perfect.
So we have a motion and we have a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? I have a question. I have one question, however. And I may be going way off course here, but doesn't our current zoning code prohibit parking in the front setback area?
Prohibit parking in the front setback area. For conforming lots. What is this? What is this? Yeah, look it up.
I will say, as I look it up, that would pretty much preclude anyone from parking in their driveway.
Pardon?
I would say that would preclude anyone from parking in their driveway.
Well, it wouldn't. Parking exceptions would allow you to do that, so it would just have to be accommodated is all.
Got it. Okay. I don't even know. It does preclude parking in the setbacks, again, without going through the parking exception process.
So then could we modify the parking exception to include permission to park in the front setback area?
We can make it explicit, yes.
Yeah, I can add some verbiage for sure.
I think they can add it, right?
But that's because of the existing house, because we don't have to provide parking for the new one, right?
That's correct. That's just to...
So that in this particular case, it's fixing it's acknowledging a grandfather position.
I think it's just clarifying the language for the parking exception to allow that second required parking space to be in tandem in the driveway in the front setback.
Okay.
I think your point is typically what we do, and then we try to accommodate where that second space would go. We're not required to do that. We have a lot of non-conforming ones, and then you've seen them where the parking space is there, but a portion of it's even in the right-of-way, and we've said, well, you can park a car there. It's unimproved, and we're not widening that street anytime soon or ever. And so we've done those as well. And so the parking exception process just accommodates that. And so if we want to be more explicit about it, it's not an issue. I mean, I think...
Well, but if and when we get to more active code enforcement, they could be ticketed. So if we put it in the exception, they won't be getting tickets for parking there.
I don't have an issue with things being more explicit. That's nice. So it makes my job nice anyway.
So with those modifications, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Lucas?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski?
Aye.
Commissioner Ingraffia?
Aye.
And Chairman Teft.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, we have no new business. We have no unfinished business. So we can move on to Planning Commissioner comments.
We are going to work on that housing.
Put it on, there we go. So this would be the time to agendize that. I would say this. Happy to have the conversation. We are working on sign ordinance, and I have to bring a parking thing back before you again. And really have signs. We have parking, and we have code enforcement that have to come back that are going to be in front of this. So I have to give a little. That's why I said I'll come back at the next meeting with a timeline when I might be able to bring it back for you, based on some other deliverables that I have and on other items moving forward. So like I said, I'll bring it back as an item for discussion at the next meeting, so I can kind of give you an idea about where we might bring that back. Time frame.
Does anybody think it might be useful to bring that lady back who spoke before us, who talked about group homes and I don't know. I don't remember her name, but she.
I know she is. Yeah, her name escapes me right now too. But I have her contact information, and
she seemed pretty knowledgeable, and the whole continuum of different possibilities that none of which I can remember now. But,
Are you talking about that one lady from this county, and then she talked about
the home share program?
Yeah, and then rehabilitation and homes and.
She had an interesting idea, and one that she's I believe still working through. And it was home share slow, I think, and it looked at the fact that Morro Bay not only has 20% of its housing stock that sits empty most of the time as secondary homes, but also have a lot of single person households, and was looking to connect those single person households with somebody that might rent a room to share the house. So it was an interesting concept, and I know she was successful in with a couple of different properties in Morro Bay making that happen. I don't know between that last conversation, which was probably over a year ago, that I had with her now, whether she's been more successful or not. I'm not sure.
So Scott, are we? I wasn't following.
The idea would be for me to bring. I think. I mean, and you all let me know. Would be to bring back. I think a discussion of our housing element and where we sit with it right now would be a good starting point, right? Because there's a lot of policies in there, and we haven't done a whole bunch of implementation on it. So it'd probably be worthwhile to revisit what's in there, what we've done and what we haven't done to this point, and then let the conversation sort of move from that. So the idea would be I would bring back an item next time telling you kind of what that would look like and where it would go when we'd be looking to take it based on those other things that are kind of sitting in front of it waiting to come before the commission. So that would be kind of my thought process there.
Scott, do we have public hearings, not public hearings, but workshops scheduled for GPAC with regard to the land use element specifically?
Not anymore. We don't have more. We've gotten most of the input that we need for that. Council's finalized the land use maps, and so the language is coming forward. Michael Baker's working on it right now for those components of it. And we don't have any workshops scheduled specifically for that at this point because we had the workshops on the map.
Okay.
And so really it's kind of policy stuff now, and it's kind of churning on that is where they're at. They've gotten a portion of the way through that. Gosh, we're running on several different tracks with that right now on the general plan LCP update. The next meeting we're probably going to have is going to be we're going to have a scoping meeting for the EIR in September. We have administrative provisions done, and we're working on the ESH stuff right now, which you're going to see this next GPAC meeting. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to keep it all straight in my head.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, but it's going to start going fast and furious from now forward because we have to be done basically a year from now. So anyway, so the answer that was along me thinking extemporaneously. No, there's no additional meeting workshop scheduled for that item. Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments from the commission? Then we will turn to Scott for planning director comments.
So I have one item that I wanted to bring to your attention. We're meeting later this week. So for a pre-construction grading meeting with Black Hill Villas. So that's the only reason I'm telling you is so when you start seeing dirt moving around out there, you'll know that yes, that was coming. Wayne Colmer and his 10-year odyssey to get that subdivision approved is finally done, and he's got his grading plans, I think, in hand. I think he's ready to start, and so we'll be doing a pre-construction meeting later this week, I think on Thursday, and then I think the idea is he's going to start grading next week. He's done some work out there, did some tree trimming and some brush removal and things like that, and now he's moving on to the next phase, which is grading. So that's going to start. So that'll be one of our first ones, the subdivisions that we have sitting in queue right now that are going to start. We have a couple one over on Main that's getting there slowly. That's a condo project that's over there. Another one on Sunset that's a 6-unit project that they started grading and then stopped because they ran into issues with their gas line and stuff. So the only point is we have a few projects that are out there, and we're going to start having sticks in the air in a bunch of different areas in town, all within a fairly short window, which is sort of unique for the city of Morro Bay. You probably haven't seen that, and so I was going to probably I'm going to start, this is going to be a regular item that I bring before you, just to kind of keep you apprised of it and to get the word out there, so maybe there's a little less surprise to our general population, so they don't like what the heck's going on in Morro Bay, because these are all projects that have been in the queue for a very long time, and they're just now kind of making it to daylight, so that's about all I got.
Very good. Is it just the one multifamily project, or are there more?
So this one's single-family standalone houses. It's Black Hill Villas, 16 units, I think, and they're starting grading. And we have the one over on North Main that's 20-something units, 6 on Sunset, and then we have the the one South Bay Boulevard, the paved, road that goes up next to the. Why can I never remember the name of the care facility over there? The
Casa de Flores?
Casa de Flores, thank you. I have a block in my head about that for some reason. So it's that one that's been sitting there for a while, and we have their different first unit in, and so that'll be coming up on your agenda here pretty soon. We did that one that was on lot 4, I think, that you saw, and that didn't get through the process, and now we have a new owner. Just paid attention. We watched the video of that, so that was good. We gave him some pretty good input, and he's coming back with a pretty good product and going a little bit different direction with it. So looking forward to that. So that'll be coming back for you, and that. So you're going to see some action there too. So there's some things going on out there.
Very good. And with that, we will adjourn to our next regular meeting, which will be here at the Veterans Memorial Building on September 5th, 2017. Good evening.